Greetings. With this video, I want to look at the creation of post-processing in portraiture. Yes, except all that is too big to fit on there. Let's shrink this down a little bit. So we're looking at post-processing in portraiture. And some of the rules here. It's best, as we talk, to start with RAW files. They have more information than your JPEGs. JPEGs are compressed files. So you can, I would say 90% of the time, get great results with a JPEG, but you know, if you're getting paid for work, you definitely want to cover all your bases and have as much flexibility as you can to get great images. So raw images are your best bet for that. The problem with raw images, there's an extra step of processing them. You need another program that can deal with raw images. Photoshop itself cannot deal with raw images, but it can use Camera Raw in conjunction with it to process these images and make them usable in Photoshop. So if you're using JPEGs, you will skip this step. But whether or not you're using Photoshop, Camera Raw, or some other processing, you always want to start with global changes. You want to look at that whole image, look at you know, the density of it, the exposure of it, are the midtones appropriately placed, are there things you need to lighten. And a good way to start with this is, one, trust your numbers and the information you can find on your screen, such as histograms, over what you see on your screen. Your screen can be brightened, or it can be lowered, or different computers are going to show different colors, or there's all sorts of variables when you're dealing with images on a screen. So we want to kind of trust our numbers here. So I look over here at my histogram, and the good thing I see is I don't have any clipping in the shadow areas, and I don't have any clipping over here in the highlight areas. But I also see, particularly in the highlights, I don't have a range that quite goes all the way. I'm not going to mess down here, but I am going to maybe try and pull out a little information here and push up the exposure. Maybe I slightly underexposed it. See, I don't want to see this red line here. It's getting higher and higher. I probably don't want to go too far beyond that, probably right in this area. I'm going to stop right there. So boost up my exposure, maybe a half or a quarter stop, I'm going to guess. And other things I look for is this is a good time to play, look at the color of things. If there's too much red or yellow or green or something like that, tint, we can pull it out. I have +10 on here. We can go to 0. You can see how the white background really helps you see the color and how it affects it. But we want sort of a neutral, but our primary concern when we're dealing with portrait is skin tone over anything else. You can let everything else go discolored, but you want to get the skin tone right. So we'll talk a little bit more about that now. So this is all just by feel a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of leave this at 0 here. I think that looks fine. Other things I look for in Camera Raw. I find it really useful for contrasty images where there's delicate details in the shadows or in the highlights. Two of my favorite sliders here in Camera Raw are the highlight slider. So I can actually kind of pull a little more information. If you look at that white background, you can see how that changes that, and you pull out a little bit more information here. That can be really useful. You can see how it also affects the curve here and kind of brings things down a little bit. So I might do a little bit that way. And the shadows, I don't really need to do anything on this image, but we'll see. You can see how it kind of flattens that out and brightens things up. We'll go extreme so you can really see. I'm probably going to leave that just at 0 because I do want to make some adjustments, but really not too much here. You can also set white points and black points, a little bit. That'll shift your histogram around. I'm not really going to mess with those. You can also play with clarity, which is like sharpness, vibrance, and saturation. They're both push saturation in different ways, in different colors. I can't remember. Vibrance is like you're cool, and saturation you're warm. It might be inverted there. But anyways, just like in Photoshop or most photo editors, there's 100 different ways to do any one thing. There are more controls here, but I don't usually get involved with them. That you can play with tone and you can play with grayscale. I'll save those things for Photoshop, honestly. And when you're doing camera raw, it actually writes a little program, a .xmp file that becomes attached to this file. So these are non-destructive changes that you're making in camera raw, and that's kind of nice. They're easy to get rid of. When you want to when you're done with it, you hit Open Image, and that will open it into Photoshop. You can hit Done. It will just save that XMP file and close this image out. I'm going to hit Open Image because I want to go to Photoshop and look at it here. First thing I'm going to do here, and this I've gotten in the habit of this being the last thing, but I want to zoom in here on the face so we can see that better. So I usually save all my cropping for later. I'm going to crop first here and really kind of zoom in, on this area, so we get a good sense of skin tone, and we can make that bigger. All right, so let's zoom that in, and when we do this, whoops. Edit undo. And actually, I'm seeing this is not the sharpest file here, so I'm slightly out of focus when I took this photograph. Could be a challenge. All right, well, our goal here is not to worry too much about that, though sharpness certainly is an issue you want to concern yourself with in portraiture. But here we're looking more at skin tones, that sort of thing. So when I look at it, skin tone is actually not too bad. Helped using strobes and setting my white balance. I got everything pretty close. One rule you want to look at with skin tones is we do have some numbers that we can consider. If we grab our eyedropper, where is my eyedropper? Right here. And if I bring up my info palette, so if I go down to Window and hit Info, it'll bring up this info palette, and I can go through here and I can see all the numbers here. Like there's my blue, and the blue is made out of 74% cyan, 74% magenta, 56 yellow, and 69% K, and K is of course black. We have RGB numbers. I think those go 0 to 256 or something like that. And the lower numbers are probably darker. So here we have 40 red, 36 green, 45 blue. This is probably more in line. RGB is more in line with how our eyes actually see, the cones in our eyes. So maybe that's why we put that as a priority. In photography, RGB takes priority over CMYK. In the design world, CMYK is the color system that they work in, but if you put your images in CMYK, you typically can't drop them off at Photo Labs and have them print it. They need RGB files. So the RGB numbers are in some ways more meaningful. The CMYK numbers are some ways easier to deal with and think about. So our rules with skin tone, all skin tones are somewhere in the orangish range, no matter how light or dark the individual is. So our rules are that we should have magenta and yellow within 10 percentage points of each other on the CMYK scale. They should also be between 40 and 60%. And you can see I have my thing here on my forehead, and it's 56% magenta, 54% yellow. So that's, pretty well spot on. If they were, and you want to move this across here, shadows, obviously it's going to get darker, and there's a little more difference between them, 68% yellow, 74% magenta, still within 10 percentage points. So I really don't need to make a lot of adjustments, and you expect it to be darker in the shadows than you do in the highlights. You have to pay a little attention whether or not you're selecting from a highlight area, a midtone area, or a shadow area. This has done a pretty good job of color rendition here. But we can change it utilizing our curves. Sometimes it's actually easier to jump over into a color space mode that would be CMYK, because then when we adjust curves, you're actually adjusting cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. In RGB, you're manipulating red, green, and blue, so it's sometimes difficult to look at those numbers. But anyways, so you can jump over that mode, but there can be also little changes in color as we go between modes. So anyways, we're doing pretty well here, but if you did need to change it, I am a fan of adjustment layers. So layer, new adjustment layer, and pretty much anything you want to to do and can be done in curves. And curves can be certainly more complicated. You know, you got your X and Y axes here to deal with, so it's more dynamic than just a simple slider, but it gives you a lot of control because not only can we deal with lightness or darkness, like my shirt here may be just a bit dark. I probably don't want my skin tones really any lighter or darker, so I'm going to actually put that back, and let's hold this information and hold this information. I might just like, that's not quite the area I'm looking at. It's probably down here, maybe. There. So, yeah, that's just not doing anything positive. You do want to, it's this match between perception and the numbers as you look at these things. So I'm going to leave that alone for now, and we'll get back to focusing on skin tones. And we can adjust those things red, green, and blue. So if we can just bring out the red channel, when I do this, if I pull it down, I take out red. If I go up, I add saturations of red to it. So, you know, we can control it here. And with myself, you know, often my skin has a reddish tint, which sometimes gets exaggerated in photographs. So I, at times, will manipulate this. When we do that, if we can bring back that info palette here, you can see that the numbers change. It shows me on the left what they were. It was 52% magenta and 50% yellow. Now it's 51% magenta and 50% yellow. You also see that the cyan increased. And the increase of cyan actually indicates a decrease in saturation, because when you increase all three of those, that is neutral density. So actually the cyan here is functioning as a neutral density tool. So red requires, it seems, cyan and magenta to make that red, which maybe makes sense. So anyways, other things that you might also see is sometimes yellow is a problem, and then yellow would be probably a mixture of green and red to manipulate yellow. We can always, you know, play with that if we go back here and open this up, and then when we take green, and if I pull out green, if we come back in here and bring back our information palette, I'm hoping that I'm manipulating yellow, and yes, you can see I'm actually taking yellow out. It didn't change the number of cyan. So we can do this with RGB curves, but you have to think a little bit more color wheel-ish and kind of tinker around to figure out how these happen. Now you see with this manipulation, now I have areas where yellow and magenta are outside of 10% from each other, so now my skin tones are wrong. And I would actually need probably to take some red out. Or put the yellow back would also, or forgive me, the green back, and that would again balance it. And it's simple to do that. Just click on here, and then we go to green, and then we just pull this back. And yeah, the arms started going a little funky there. So, all right, anyways. So global challenges, we can play with that. Your primary, you always function with density, the lightness or the darkness of the image first, then contrast, and then color balance when you're dealing with portraiture. All right, and now this is all global here. So the next step, though, is to look at local things. You can't always fix everything with global adjustments. You quite often have to go in with local adjustments. Three things to look at with local adjustments, in particular with portraiture. I would say eyes, hair, and teeth. Now, my teeth aren't visible in this image, so we can kind of ignore them. And pretty much with teeth, you know, we have this sort of obsession with white teeth. So quite often people don't like their teeth to be too dark, or if they're smokers or something, have yellow teeth, they might want, or you just get old and your teeth get a little darker and yellow. You can whiten those up. You always have to be careful a little bit. You know, you don't want to make them white. Just lighter and a little bit more neutral usually is better, but you don't want to take out all of the hue and make them, you know, paper white. It's always a balancing act between all these things. So that's what you might do with the teeth. And for our local selections, we have a couple useful tools. We have our lasso tool here, and that's nice. It's just a freehand tool. If we click and hold on that, we get the polygon lasso tool. I don't find it very useful at all for portraiture, but I do sometimes find the magnetic lasso tool very useful for areas. So for my hair, for instance, if we wanted to do something with the hair, like it just seemed a little flat, which is very common when we're photographing, I might be able to see how it kind of just attaches itself to these areas of contrast. And you might, it's not a perfect tool, but it can help you get roughed in. So I usually go in and do a rough selection, and then I'll go back with the lasso tool. And we always have to finish this where we started. Keep that in mind. Whoops, click too many times. Edit, undo, Command Z. Come back over here and click lasso tool, and then up here I have a new selection. So if I start selecting, it just gets rid of the previous selection and creates a new selection. This one will add to any selection, which might be useful here with this selection, or this one will take selection away. So if I come out here and go, oh, I want to get rid of this where it's in the skin more than the hair, and get rid of that little bit, I can do that. If I want to add the selection, well, maybe right here I could add just a little bit to this area. Add that to that selection. And then we want to feather. You always want to feather your selections a little bit, and that's really dependent on how big your file is. This file is probably average low since I cropped it, and the area I'm dealing with, I don't want too much. I don't want it to affect out here in the skin. I just want it to affect in this little area. So I would probably recommend 4 to 10 pixels. So 6 seems good, I guess. We'll leave it at 6. Maybe we'll go 7, so just hit 7 there. And if you don't like that, highlight it. We can go up to 8 and hit OK. And then it feathers it a little bit. And then I just do another adjustment layer. I like adjustment layers because I can get rid of them. I can turn them on or off, or I can go back and readjust them, or I can turn down the opacity of them. And it gives me a lot of flexibility. And again, I do like curves a lot. So here's our value range of the hair. If we want a little bit lighter, we can do that. If we want a little bit of contrast here, one of the best ways to make contrast with curves, put a point in the middle and then drag the shadows down. And maybe drag. Almost makes me look more gray. I don't need the help. All right, and then the best way is to turn your new adjustment layer on and off. Is it better here or is it better here? And you can do that and make that decision. Or maybe you need to make a slightly different adjustment. If you want to do that, you just double click on that and it brings back, should bring that forward, but we can go back here and alter this some more. All right, so sometimes you have to add hair. Hair is difficult to photograph, and we lose texture in it, especially with people with darker hair. We have to be more conscientious there, and you might have to add a little bit of contrast. Teeth need to be whitened. Eyes, one thing we're looking for is a catch light. Now, one of the problems with this portrait is I'm facing away from the light behind me, or it was pretty well dominant one-point light source. I might have had a background light on this too. But, I wanted some more shadowing, more of a profile lighting on this image. So one thing I'm not seeing here is I'm not seeing a catch light in my eye. And we can confirm that by, grabbing our little tool here and zooming in on it. And yes, indeed, there's no catch light there. So I might do that a little bit later. Now, one of the things with eyes is sometimes we want to bring out their contrast in them a little bit, and saturation, and a lot of times when you photograph, that is not coming out. So I would just make a selection right on the eye itself. Now, if I have heavy shadows here from the brow or things like that cast, those are things you also may want to soften. And you may be able to do that at the same time as you do the eyes themselves, or you might have to do that as a separate selection where you just come up here and soften that. That's not too bad, but you can see how out of focus my image is. Sometimes when you're photographing yourself and you don't have help, it's a bit more of a challenge. So I had to turn my focus off, and this one is poor. I have better files, but we're just going with it. Okay, anyways, so I would select that, and I think I'm going to leave, you could actually select them together, and that might be better because they're photographed at the same time, so it keeps this relative light shadow to them balanced. Or we might find that this would lighten it too much and become sort of odd. But anyways, we'll go with it and we'll see what we have. So I select it, I modify it, I put on the feather. I'm going to go like 3 pixels because I really don't have a very large area of selection. And then I'll just do new layer adjustment and curves. And I come back here and I look at this and I want to make them a little bit lighter. Woo, that's a little too much. It doesn't always take a lot. Maybe a little bit more contrasty. Maybe that's too much. Ooh. You can go out. You can go too far fairly quickly. Well, let's pull that down a little bit. Right there, I'm looking at this eye in particular. I don't want that white to get too out of control. And saturation, you know, my eyes are kind of bluish, greenish, so I might come in the blue here, and I might just punch up the blue in particular. Now we see that it's also affecting it in the white, so I might actually have to make another selection that's just the cornea or retina area, and you know, so I don't affect that white too much, but you know. There we go. Something like that. And also now, as I'm said, I also do not see a catch light. And a catch light can be very useful in your eyes. And sometimes we just manufacture it. So I might take up the brush tool here. I might come down here. I want a very small point. I only want a few pixels. You know, probably less than 10. So we'll try 6 pixels. And we can have it fairly hard. And I might just come here and I might just, you know, put one like right. No, that's not what I'm wanting. Oh, I have black selected here. Yeah, that's a problem. We can just take pretty much pure white. And I might just put it there. No, I need something bigger. That I'm learning. So let's come out here and let's do maybe, whoops, 11 pixels. All right, we'll see. That might be too big, but we'll experiment. Oops. Oh, here's the problem. I'm also working on this curves layer. You always have to make sure you're on the right layer. I actually want to be working on my base layer when I'm doing this. I'm going to look for my history. Let's bring up this history palette. Let's go back to where before I did any brush tools, and now we'll come up here and go to the base layer and do this, and now it's probably going to be too big. Yeah. Edit, undo. We'll go back. You know, details, right, people? So we'll try 4 pixels. And I'll try and put on the same place on the other eye. Now, back here, I might actually want to darken this. I'm looking at that, and I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to click on this. I'm going to just make it a little more grayish because it's in that shadow. And then I'll zoom out. See what that looks like. So a little catch light in the eye kind of helps a little bit. We can turn on and off. You know, there's the eye adjustments. Look kind of freaky, but I think it's actually better with that. I could go in and maybe neutralize the whites a little bit. But those are the 3 main areas that would require local adjustments. You may also find some problems, you know, with skin. Some of us have, you know, our skin is less even in color, and you want to kind of even those things out. You don't want to make people look, you know, Photoshop fake. But you do want to sort of even color variations out in there. And there's a whole thing we can do with skin and softening and all sorts of techniques with that that get much more intricate. You can download you can download actions in your I'm looking for my, well, maybe I'll have to bring that up. You know, if I bring up my actions palette here, there are set actions that you can get, but you can also download free actions. And there's a lot of actions out there for skin, perfect skin, smooth skin. A lot of them end up pretty Photoshoppy. looking, but there's always some variation of blurring a little bit and coloration, saturation, evening out textures, as well as irregularities in color. You can do those locally, or you can get programs, actions is what they're called, to do those things. But I think for now, those are the major things. You may find some other areas that you need to take out. If someone did want to remove some imperfections in the skin, I find a great tool for myself. There's other ways to go about this, but I like the clone stamp tool. And if I grab that and then we come over here and click on the base layer, then it'll work. That tool's too big. I'm only going to need, size. Bring this down to like 25. Yeah, maybe there's a little spot there on my nose. Let's see if we can fix that. So I hit Option and click the mouse, and then it selects from that area, and then I come down here and I go over that, and then it fixes it. And we can see what that looks like if we bring back our history palette, and we can go look at the before. So look at my nose here as I go before and after, and it got rid of that red spot. I didn't have to pay a couple $100 that the dermatologist wanted to do to get rid of that. Hey, so people might want moles removed or things like that, or if they're cuts or scars or things like you can take from one area to the other. There are more tools there. We also have the patch tool, which can be useful. The spot healing brush is sometimes useful. All these tools can help fix minor imperfections in there. So, all right. Well, anyways, there's some thoughts on with post-production and portraiture in Photoshop. There are other programs that you can use. GIMP could do that, but of course they're going to move things around and call them different things and whatnot. But there are some basic starters for it.